there's a common bond there, and it builds trust in that I know you're not going to quit on me, and you know I'm not going to quit on you. So when things get hard, whether that be physically or emotionally, I know that you're going to be by my side. Like I know, for instance, you, Brad, we've done enough stuff together. I know that no matter what, you got my back, and you know that I've got your back. But that mentality can also wrap back through to work. It can wrap back through to community organizations, to any place where there's a leadership function, in the sense of if you build that trust, then it exists in a way that people know you won't quit, and you're always going to be there, and they can have faith that the job is going to get done one way or the other.
Leaders are not born in a womb. They are forged through heat, pressure, and a whole lot of sweat. The Fire Forged Leader podcast serves the audience through exploring leadership at work, in the community, and with the family, using a practical perspective and real-life experiences from the host, Steve Baumgartner, and his guests in The Forge. Now, it's time to enter the Forge with the Fire Forged Leader.
Welcome back to Fire Forged Leader Masculinity series with your hosts, Dan and Brad. Brad, good to see you, man.
Yeah.
Glad to be on this again.
Yeah, it's been a minute. I guess it's been a month, but
Yeah.
here we are again. Get to see you
Recording. Absolutely. We've been going back and forth over text the last couple of days about an experience you had, and I thought that'd be a really good thing to talk about here on the podcast. It dealt with leadership and it dealt with masculinity, and just kind of how the two kind of meet together. So I'm going to kick it over to you and kind of let you give a little bit of an overarching view of what happened, and then we'll talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, of course. So I traveled for work this past week to Phoenix for a team offsite. So I've got a team stretched across the U.S., and this was the first chance we all had as a team to come together, to spend time together, to build connections, to really set up planning for 2025, etc. And one of the things heading into this trip that was kind of interesting is that most of the guys and girls on my team know that I do jujitsu. I like to hike. I like to lift weights. I like to do these things. And leading up to the trip, there were a bunch of people that were going to be at this offsite reaching out to me saying, "Hey, Brad, we're going to go do something. Or we're going to go on a hike. Like, are you going to go lift? Are you going to go to jujitsu? I'd want to come with you. That'd be awesome." Naturally, when I hear these things, it makes my eyes light up. Of course, I'm going to do these things. And it's awesome that you want to come with me, right? And so we go down there. And for those of you who are familiar with Phoenix, or have had the honor of hiking Camelback Mountain is no joke. It's not a very long hike. It's about a mile and a half up, mile and a half back. Probably not even that. But it's strenuous. There are sections where there's metal railings where you have to either pull yourself up or help descend. There are huge boulders that you have to scramble up. It's really steep. It's very difficult. And, I'm somebody who, I live in Utah. I like to hike. So it was strenuous and challenging, but it was absolutely doable for me. But one of the cool things for me is when I showed up, there were 3 other folks who came along. And what really was striking and was an incredible takeaway for me was there's a guy on my team. He showed up. He's a little hungover. He's not in the greatest shape right now. And he didn't even necessarily have the best shoes to do this hike. But he was insistent that he wanted to do Camelback Mountain. And he was slow, but as we scaled, he didn't stop. He kept coming, despite slipping, scraping up his hands, despite being pretty winded, despite losing his water at one point during the hike as it rolled down the mountain and he didn't want to go get it. He just kept going, right? And he eventually made it to the summit, got to the top, did it, didn't give up, got there. We stood there for a minute. We kind of took a bunch of pictures. It was a really, really cool experience. And then we had the crazy intense descent down. And afterwards he said, "Brad, thank you. That was the highlight of my trip. It was something I needed. It was something that I was able to learn something about myself by not giving up." And, in talking to you, we both felt that this was a really, really interesting topic that we could dive into.
Yeah, I mean, the way you told the story just now and our previous conversation, it melds the concepts of masculinity and leadership perfectly, right? Because these are guys on your team who you have a leadership role with, and they're coming out and asking you to do these traditionally masculine things, and that's pretty damn cool. Um, from a leader's perspective, how did how did this event both make you feel about your team, and how did it help build a camaraderie within your team?
Yeah, that's a great question because I had a lot of thoughts, right? I think I sent you like a Marco Polo or something prior to me leaving, saying how cool it was to recognize that other men see this in me, but that it's essentially calling to them. Like there's some sort of element of masculinity of challenging yourself physically and mentally that jujitsu or hiking or any activity like that can kind of elicit. And that the fact that they could see that in me, that they wanted to explore that and they wanted to discover that and they wanted somebody alongside them to help challenge them so they could do it, really suggested, we as men, this kind of inherently lives in all of us. Right? Like we want to be challenged. We want to spend time with other men who are going to challenge us and help us to do better things. And it doesn't necessarily exist with any sort of prevalence within society today. Right? Like society is so focused on comfort and convenience and just a simple, cozy lifestyle that we don't really have a lot of opportunities to challenge ourselves unless we seek them out. So being with men saying, hey, I know that my manager seeks out challenge. I want that. I crave that. It really helped build a forge and a bond, right? Like we were able to have that conversation, like we were able to have powerful conversations as we climbed up, as we descended, talking about life, talking about religion, talking about politics, things that generally are seen as taboo, right? But these are conversations that we were able to have and to be able to talk constructively to strengthen each other. And coming out of that, I look at that guy and the guy and the girl that also joined me as capable, and I feel like a bond and a connection to them because we're able to spend that time together, doing something challenging together. Like this is something, and I don't want to steal your thunder because I feel like you may want to go into this. But the very first time I met you was when we went to, main event through Order of Man back in 2021. And that bond was forged through doing challenging, mostly physical things together.
Mm-hmm.
Rucking in the morning, doing Indian runs, doing all those things. Like it builds a bond and a connection that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, you went right where I was going to go in sense of every team that I've been a part of, whether it's all men or a combination of men and women, the strongest teams have always been built by groups of people who do tough things together. Now, what you did was outside, very active lifestyle stuff, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. But I find that those kinds of things outside of the typical atmosphere that your team is in, and I'm being very vague on purpose because it's very easy for us in a leadership capacity to talk about work, but it could be a church group, it could be your family, your household, it could be anything. But when you do those hard things together is when you really kind of take the walls down in terms of the group's ability to gel together. And you're right, main event 2021 when we were together, like that built an instant bond with everyone because we did hard shit together.
Yeah.
But we also were able to, I think like the concept of going on a hike is great, right? Rolling jiu-jitsu, lifting weights, terrific. But those are more limiting aspects because you're either in a group class setting or you're very limited in what you can do and how you can do it. But
Yeah.
when you're outside doing something such as a hard hike, like it can be a very social thing as well as a strenuous activity.
Yeah.
And you're allowed to have conversations. You're allowed to kind of move within the group, so to speak. You said there's 3 or 4 other people. So I'm sure that at points in the hike, you were talking to each individual separately, and then maybe like a smaller group was together, whether they're the fast group or the slow group, whatever it was,
Yeah.
that allows that kind of bonding that just doesn't exist in maybe more like a jiu-jitsu class setting. But in general, those hard things, they build a unity that, just going out to happy hour after work and getting a drink with everybody probably isn't gonna build. Like I would argue, and I bet you would agree that subset of your team you have a tighter bond with now than the other part of your team.
Yeah. And that's one thing that's really interesting because, when you have these offsite events or when you get teams together, happy hour tends to be a pretty critical key part of what everybody wants to do. You have the meetings for the day, you have your sessions, that ends, everybody goes to happy hour, they go to dinner, they get some drinks. Obviously that was part of the event too. And what's interesting is obviously for those who know anything about me, I don't drink. Like that's just being LDS, that's not something that I do. So for the folks that went to happy hour, is kind of this interesting juxtaposition, right? I had this group that came with me hiking. Then you had the group that went out last night, stayed out really late, had a lot of fun. They said it was a great time going happy hour. But the levels, it's very noticeable. And this isn't taking away from anybody who wants to spend time doing things like that. There's a time and a place for having activities where you're going to go out and drink and have some fun. But when you actually talk about bonding and growing together and kind of forming like this level of unity, right? You're not going to necessarily ever be able to capture that going to dinner, going out for drinks. Like you can have fun, you can laugh, you can have some great conversation. But when you're going through something shared that is difficult, right? When you're choosing to, we're using this mountain because it's very much what I dealt with, but it goes beyond just hikes. There are any number of things that this could include, but the shared objective of getting to this summit. And the only way you can get there is through hard work. And it's going to kind of suck at times. It's going to be difficult. But as you set out together to do it, you realize at that moment, there's no way I'm turning back. I know this guy over here is not turning back. I know they're not turning back. I know she's not turning back. There's no way I'm turning back either. And that keeps you putting one foot in front of the other, right? Like there's a really valuable, incredible lesson if you think about the very concept of hiking, right? There's objective you seek, and it's upward. There's a lot of symbolism when you think of like going upward.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're striving to accomplish something, you're striving to summit something, but it requires work. It requires climbing, requires sweat. Sometimes you fall down, but here's the thing. If your goal is the summit, regardless of whether you fall down, regardless of whether you need to sit down and take a breather, you're going to get up and you're going to keep going. And in that journey, you tend to learn something about yourself and you tend to learn something about those around you. And that's what's so powerful about these types of aspirational things that we seek is what lessons are there to learn, right? Or what can we take away from by simply taking this action to put one foot in front of the other, saying, I'm going to get there no matter what. It sucks. I'm tired. My feet hurt. My hands hurt. My head hurts. But I'm getting there. And when you do, right? Like when you summit that mountain, when you accomplish that, just that feeling of accomplishment, of fulfillment, that's where it's important. And that's where it's incredible. So,
Yeah, there's a lot there, right? From the self-improvement masculinity standpoint, there's a huge moment of realizing that I'm going to have a no quit mentality, right? I'm going to work through this. This is hard, but this is where to steal the phrase for the podcast, I'm going to forge myself here, and I'm going to use this activity to kind of strengthen myself and be a stronger man. And then from the leadership side of things, these are the kind of events where you get to know the people you work with as people and not, names on a spreadsheet, the tools that you can use in terms of your job and that kind of thing. Yeah, I was thinking a lot when you were just talking about that. I was thinking I recently traveled for work and had to go to an event where they bring industry together and we support programs. I work in aerospace and defense. We're supporting a particular aircraft right now, and we're setting up a support team for that aircraft. And I went as a representative for my company, had a good time, learned a lot. went out to dinner with folks. They had a social hour, and it was good, but it was, 25 people going to a brewery. We had dinner. There was a good part of the group that I didn't talk to because everyone kind of stayed at their own table and didn't really mingle. Like it wasn't even set up to mingle. Everyone was sitting down, and it's like that's great. But if we had all woken up one morning and been like, you know what, we're going to meet here at 7 o'clock and just go for a hike. Not even something as strenuous as yours, but we're just going to go do 3 miles in the foothills where we were at. That probably would have built a better team unity and allowed people to get to know each other outside of work more than the social hour that we had. The
Yeah.
the other thing that I was thinking about when you talk about is what you did promoted conversation that was non-work related. The thing that I was at, everyone was there and it was still, you were still on the clock. You were still talking about work. You were still talking about your position and what you did, what your company did and how they fit into this program. And it was more relaxed conversation, but it was still work conversation. Like, I don't know anything about these people. You know a lot about the people you work with now because you kind of went through it with them and you did something completely non-work related and you were able to have those conversations.
100%. One of my core leadership philosophies that I have, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm some sort of perfect leader or some sort of perfect manager. There are a lot of things that I can improve upon, but something I fundamentally believe in is the importance of getting to know somebody for who they are, not for how they show up at work, not the type of, in my case, technical success manager that they are. Right? Like, yes, it's important that you're able to do your job and do it well and do it effectively. But if you can truly understand who somebody is, what their values are, what keeps them going, what gets them out of bed in the morning, if you can start to understand those things, you can kind of build that level of relationship. You can forge some sort of bond with them. That to me is truly how you're able to effectively lead. And that's not necessarily easy, right? Like one of the things that I do that's very different is I let my I let my direct reports run our one-on-ones. We can talk about whatever. We can talk about life. We can talk about family situations. We can talk about whatever. Because I feel that it's important to let them know I'm here to get to know you as a human being, so that when it's time to deliver and show up and do things for work, I can understand how to relate to you, how to be able to communicate with you effectively, so that you can go out and execute on what you need to execute on. And when you're in a setting like this where you're actually with these individuals, right, like that, going on a hike creates more of that opportunity, right? Or doing something together, like you said, just going on a walk, going on doing something together where you're not just talking about work. You're not just talking about stated objectives for 2025 or how you're going to effectively close 2024 or whatever those conversations look like. Like, yes, those conversations are important. Like, they have a time and a place, but really understanding the human element of somebody and what they're about, what makes them tick, and what they're capable of, like that's that's the stuff. Like that's the stuff that I get really, really, really excited about. Right.
I was told two things early in my management career. One is good managers manage the resource, great managers manage the people. Meaning, good managers, you've got an engineer, you've got a designer, you've got an accountant, whatever. You manage that to the best of their skills. Great. Great manager understands the person behind those skills and manages that person. Um, and then the other thing is communication is what the listener does, which is what you were just talking about. Is you get to learn these people, you get to understand these people, and you get to use that knowledge of how they communicate to better know how to communicate with them. And that's a huge tool. So it's these events to me are a huge part of great leadership and a huge part of increasing your capability to have the best possible team
Yeah.
that you can.
Yeah. And as you talked about, this, leadership goes beyond management of work. It goes beyond, the time you're spending with your direct reports or other colleagues. It transcends that, right? It goes into how I can effectively lead as a man in my community or how I can within my home. And I kind of want you to talk about something because you recently had an opportunity to spend a weekend with a bunch of men. This was back in October.
Yep.
Was it October? It was October, right? There are a lot of leadership principles, a lot of powerful conversations that you were able to have. I wasn't able to participate. No, it was September because it was my anniversary week, and I couldn't.
That's right. It was late September. You're right.
Late September. So there's an event, and I know that you came away, and every man came away from that energized, uplifted, ready to run through a brick wall. So talk to.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm kind of
So,
teasing it out, but talk to us about it.
so as we've mentioned before, Brad and I are both part of what's called the Iron Council, which is a men's group. Within that Iron Council, there are battle teams, which are groups of 15, roughly 15 men who get together on a weekly basis for a call and then keep in touch on a daily basis to support each other. Brad and I have had the privilege of running a team each. We were actually both battle team mentors, which means we had a couple of these teams underneath us. Um, but we were also part of we'll call it a subgroup within the Iron Council called the Pantheon, which is essentially a group of 4 battle teams that we have helped start. We all have the same ethos, and we work kind of the same goals, and we work the same ways. Anyways, that team is called the Pantheon. We put together what we call the Pantheon Games. It's the second year that we've done it. So we get members from all those teams. Everyone on all 4 teams is welcome to show up. We had, I want to say, about 20 guys this year, maybe 25 guys, somewhere in that ballpark. We showed up in Pennsylvania, and we had a weekend of it was just an awesome time. There was brotherhood, there was leadership, there was learning. So every day we would get up, we would do some kind of physical activity, usually a ruck in the morning. We actually had classes during the day. We had, a lot of the guys brought in a level of subject matter expert knowledge that they were able to share on topics such as nutrition, starting a business. There was one of the guys taught CPR, like all kinds of different things in terms of just becoming better men. And then we would do usually physical training in the afternoon as well. And then we ate all our meals together. But there was a lot of downtime as well where we all just did just spent time together and just had conversations. There was fireside chats every night where, we had a good time, and it wasn't all just like head down, like do the work kind of stuff. There was a lot of goofing around, but even the fireside chats where it was very social, we ended up on to really deep conversations. And all this to come back to doing the hard things together, right? The physical training in the morning before breakfast, the physical training in the afternoon, the hard conversations that we had about our families and our marriages and our lives, that builds a sense of trust and rapport with those guys that you don't get otherwise. So that same concept flows through to basically any leadership perspective, and I had the honor of being in kind of like a senior leadership role in the sense that I've helped establish at least 3 of these teams, and or been a part of 3 of these teams, I should say, and and had the ability to kind of oversee some of the ethos building here, and to see the leadership that I've provided take root and hold, and see some of these guys just come up and embrace that's awesome, because I can see those changes that we've made in men, and see the changes that they're now implementing in their lives and in their communities. And that's because of doing hard things together, having those conversations, and then everyone kind of being on the same page and working towards a common goal.
Yeah, that's a really, really powerful testament to the things that we've worked on trying to create within the ethos of the Pantheon. As you were talking, there was something that came up that I kind of wanted to ask you to get your thoughts on. Right,
Yep.
like it's this concept of doing hard things together, and it doesn't always have to be physical. We've used a lot of examples of physical, but it can go into emotional or mental. But by doing these hard things together, seemingly this unlocks the ability to have next level conversation. So talk to me a little bit about that idea. It's like if we do hard things together, it's going to unlock the ability to communicate on a much deeper, much more profound level.
Yeah, I think it builds a sense of trust. Now, that's the first word that comes to mind is if we're doing something hard together, and yeah, you're right. Like we've typically been talking about physical activities, which I think as men, that's it's a low hanging fruit for us to bond over because in general, men like to do hard work. So for us to find something physical to do together, whether you're going hunting together or you're working out together or you're hiking a mountain or whatever it is, there's a common bond there, and it builds trust in that I know you're not going to quit on me, and you know I'm not going to quit on you. So when things get hard, whether that be physically or emotionally, I know that you're going to be by my side. Like I know, for instance, you, Brad, we've done enough stuff together. I know that no matter what, you got my back, and you know that I've got your back.
Yeah.
Right? It could be us out on a hike, and I know that you're not gonna quit on me. But it could also be if I'm having trouble at home, I know that you've got my back and you're going to support me and give me a hand however I need it, and vice versa. You know, walking through whatever battles we have in life. And that mentality, now we're talking about a group of men now in a social setting, but that mentality can also wrap back through to work. It can wrap back through to community organizations, to any place where there's a leadership um, function, in the sense of if you build that trust, then it exists in a way that people know you won't quit, and you're always going to be there, and they can have faith that the job is going to get done one way or the other.
Yeah. Kind of an interesting example of that coming back to my hike was when we were coming down, one of the guys I was talking to, really, really, really good guy. We started talking about religion. And religion can be a very taboo thing to talk about. But
Work
yeah,
at it. Yeah.
especially in a work setting, right? So we just scaled this mountain together. We're descending. We're like talking about how awesome it is. And this guy is really interesting. He spends half of his year living in Argentina, and then he spends his other half of the year living in Miami. So talking to me about like what it's like living in Argentina, and I just kind of casually mentioned like getting married to a Brazilian girl. So I casually mentioned, I was going to be a missionary for my church, for the LDS church in Brazil, and then tore my ACL. It never came to fruition. And then we just started talking about religion. He's somebody who is Christian, like, and he's the type of Christian where he's been in sermons where they've said things that are very anti-Mormon, right? And he's like, like I don't agree with those things, but let's talk about some of like the things that you guys believe, some of the things I believe. Why do you guys believe the Book of Mormon? Why do you guys believe these things? That's not a conversation you're generally going to be able to have in a work setting. But
Right.
because there was a certain level of trust and mutual respect that was garnered through this difficult hike, we're able to talk very openly and honestly about what we believe, what our differences were, and it's okay that if they're just like that, we don't necessarily agree or align on those things. And I'll tell you what, having that level of conversation in terms of mutual respect and understanding and being able to get not just one layer deep, but 3 layers deep in terms of how we both fundamentally believe in God and how our lives should be run and how we choose to execute on our lives, like you said, it creates a level of trust, right? Like it was cool to think that it's a very taboo topic that all of a sudden became on the table, okay to talk about and okay to talk about in depth because there was that level of trust and mutual respect that was garnered through that hike. And I think that that's one of the things we talk about a lot within the Iron Council, within these Pantheon teams, is we have very hard conversations. Everything and anything is on the table. Religion, politics, a lot of guys have opened up with their struggles with pornography or drinking or eating or their struggles in their marriages. Like they've opened up on some very big, intense, in-depth things that are very close to their soul. The only reason by which they've been able to do that is because of that trust there has been forged through being able to do hard things together. Right? Like when you're able to look at another man and know this guy is showing up, he's showing up alongside me. I can trust him. I can talk about all that stuff in my soul that I I'm pretty scared to talk about to myself, let alone anybody else. All of a sudden, that's on the table because this guy alongside me, I know he's got my back.
It, it, you were talking about trust and respect in there, and I was kind of bouncing back and forth in my head. Like from a chicken and egg standpoint, like what causes, do you gain trust because you have respect? Do you gain respect because you have trust in those situations? Are they two words for the same thing? Like there's a lot going on there, but I like the concept of also the respect part of it, because the effort that you put in with this guy that allowed you to have that conversation, right? There was trust, absolutely, but there's also respect. Okay, like you can look at somebody now and go, okay, I know you're capable of doing difficult stuff. I also know that you're capable of not overreacting necessarily, maybe is where I'm going with this. So we can have a conversation, and I know that you'll be receptive of it, and probably respect me enough to the point where you may not agree with me, but it doesn't turn into an argumentative situation. So it's a really interesting concept to me, that the difference between trust and respect.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And as you were talking about that, I was kind of participating in that same exercise. You could make arguments either way. Like I think I tend to lean on the side that respect probably comes first, but then again, you could convince me otherwise. But with that in line, or with that in mind, one thing that was kind of coming to mind when you were talking about that is we're actually having these conversations, right? Like so many of us right now, operationally talking about our belief systems, it's done in echo chambers, such as Twitter or what's the new one called? Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram.
Mhm.
Like you just see the comment sections, you see these posts, you see these tweets. There's this culture societally that I'm going to live in an echo chamber. If you don't necessarily agree with me wholeheartedly, or if you're not aligned with me, you're a fascist, you're a bigot, you're a homophobe, whatever label you want to try to attribute to somebody, simply because you can't see eye to eye. So we can't disagree well, right? And the ability to have conversations where you and I don't necessarily see eye to eye, but we can do so respectfully, like that's gotten lost. And I think a huge part of the reason why things like that have gotten lost is because societally we've gotten away from doing things like going on hikes together, doing hard things together. It's so much more easy and convenient to sit on one's couch or to kind of hang out in a setting where they choose to surround themselves with safety because it's comfortable, because there's no risk involved, because there's not a level of discomfort. And think about the societal damage that that's caused. I choose to be comfortable. I choose to not do these things. So I'm going to be so ingrained on how I believe that if anybody doesn't necessarily agree with me, I'm going to attribute these labels to them. At least a destructive, toxic dialogue and discourse that's not healthy for anybody. So things like what we're talking about are ways that you can start to break some of those things down if they're occurring in your life.
I'm smiling because just your continued use of the word comfort had me thinking about an old, when I first joined the IC. I was on team, and one of our kind of unwritten mottos was growth comes from the discomfort, right? And you always think about like the tree that grows in the crack in the rock, and stuff like that, right? Like that is where growth occurs, is in those tough places. So,
Yeah, I
doing
mean,
hard things creates growth, whether it's relationships, whether it's physical strength, whether it's emotional stability. Like you do hard work in any area of life and you're going to see growth.
yeah, yeah. Like if you were to ask yourself the question, what at what points in my life did I grow the most? Pretty sure there aren't going to be too many of those that are going to have comfort involved with them.
It's not the areas where you were able to sit on the couch and kind of relax and watch the football game all weekend. It was the areas where, you went through some pain. Again, emotional, physical, mental, doesn't matter, but you went through some pain, and that's where you saw growth.
Yeah. So shared pain is what we should strive for, right?
It's not a bad thing, if you can control it. Like, I mean, that hike was in essence shared pain. There was physical pain that happened there, and I'll bet you some of the people, maybe yourself included, had to go through some mental trauma to overcome and get to the point where they were able to finish. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, man, it's been great talking to you as always. I like this topic a lot. I think, like I said at the beginning, I think the situation you were in was great conversation fodder for both leadership and masculinity and how the two really intertwine. So I appreciate you sharing that. And I look forward to future conversations like this in future episodes.
Yeah,
So
likewise.
I want to thank you guys all for listening. Make sure you check us out online. I'm on Instagram at untaming_Dan, and Brad is at untamed_silverback. And then you can also check out the Fireforge Leader Instagram channel, and Steve's got all of the socials fired up under Fireforge Leader. So check that out and make sure you don't miss an episode. And until then, we'll leave you guys all with one question. What are you doing to untame your masculinity?
You have just experienced the heat and pressure of the forge. Remember, words without action are meaningless. Now, after the heat of the forge, shape your thoughts, quench your brain, then put your new tools to use, adding to your leadership. Tune in next week for more lessons from the forge.